Hi, I'm Holly of Tuesday Associates. Today we're going to be discussing voter identification for your GOTV plan. What is GOTV? It is getting out the vote. You want to get your people out to vote, whether it's on election day or early voting. You want to maximize your vote. You don't want to leave your election results up to fate. You want to control it as much as possible. And with that being said, GOTV can make up anywhere from a 4 to 10% difference. Wouldn't you like to have another 4 to 10% voters showing up for you? Nowadays, it can be as much as 20 to 30%. That's right, 20 to 30% increase in your overall voter turnout. That means that if you're behind in the polls, you could actually use GOTV to make sure that to increase your likelihood of winning. So how do you do GOTV? Well, it starts on day one, and you got to start with identifying your vote. Who do you want to come out and vote? How do you figure that out? Because of course you'd like to increase the turnout, but how do you get those people out to vote, and who are those people? Well, there's several methods for identifying the vote. There's door knocking, phone surveys, text messaging, collecting data on the web, growing your database of donors and volunteers, and social media and Twitter. With time being the most valuable resource in a campaign, you need to devise a plan to quickly identify as many people as possible. Let's talk about door knocking. It's almost impossible to door knock on every single home in the district. So you need to whittle down a good list of persuadable voters. How do you do that? Well, first you need a voter database. Where do you get one of those? Well, the Republican and Democratic parties usually give you access to a voter database that has a ton of information on there. It has gender, it has age, it has voting history on it. So hopefully your party's going to give you access. But if that doesn't work, there are vendors that will sell you a voter database. Want to make sure it has voter history on there. When did people vote? All that kind of information. Very important. Using that data, you're going to whittle down a good list of persuadable voters. Most lists will rank voters in two different ways. They are ranked 1, A, B, C, and D. Likelihood of going out to vote. A voters are perfect voters. They vote all the time. B voters generally vote. C voters usually just vote in presidential years, and D voters are not very good voters. The other way they rank your voters is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 voters vote Republican, and 5 voters vote Democrat. The 2, 3s, and 4s are in between. They're in the middle. So using that data, you're going to create a walking list, a door knocking list. And who do you pick off that list? Well, as a Republican, I'm not going to door knock on number 5s. They're Democrats. They always vote Democrat. So I know if I'm going to go knock on their door, I'm not going to get their vote. So I'm not going to go knock on their door. So I'm going to wipe them off my list. Most likely, I'm going to take the 1s off the list. And you're probably wondering why they vote Republican. Well, if they always vote Republican, I really don't need to go visit them unless I'm in a primary. I'm going to look at the 2, 3s, and 4s. But before I pull that list, what I do is I look at the number of voters, the 1, 2s, and 3s, making sure that they vote in the type of election that I'm running in. So if the number has to be, if you're running in a presidential year, there's a lot more people that vote in an election in a presidential year than an off-election presidential year. So depending on the election I'm running in, I look at how many 1, 2, and 3 voters there are that on that list. And that has to equal, my 1, 2s, and 3s has to equal 65% of the vote. Why 65%? Because you're only going for 51% of the vote? I have to have enough persuadable people. Because I know when I door knock, I'm not going to get every single voter. So I need to have enough people. So if the 1, 2s, and 3s add up to 65% of the vote, then that's going to be my list, minus the ones, because I already know that they're going to go vote for the Republican. So I want to go talk to the 2s and 3s, the people that are in the middle that need to be persuaded. Now that you have a list, what are you going to do with it? You're going to go door knocking, of course. But I put my door knocking on Red Bull. How do you do that? You recruit a lot of volunteers. And a lot of it starts before you even go out to the doors. I have a team of volunteers that address postcards that are sent to the voters, the persuadable voters, before we even show up to their homes. And it usually arrives about within the week of the candidate visiting that door. You don't want it 2 or 3 weeks down the road, because then the voter will forget that. So you want to have your team stay up with it as much as possible every week, shipping out postcards so that when the candidate shows up, the voter already knows something about that candidate. So that's one thing. The next thing I do is I take the palm cards, and sometimes in my lower tier races, the candidate writes it out, "Sorry I missed you, Ed," or or a volunteer writes it out, "Sorry I missed you." We write it right on the palm cards. So when you go to visit a home where the voter's not home, you just leave the "Sorry I missed you" right in the doorway. You don't stand there writing it at the time you're at the door, because that's wasting time. You want to hit as many doors while you're out there as quickly as possible. The next thing I do with that is, for my door knocking, is I do what they call as a push-pull system. This is very important. It takes minimum 2 volunteers to go out door knocking with your candidate, and we implement a push-pull system. How does that work? Well, the first volunteer goes and tries to start hitting homes, and they try to find somebody at home. And if they hit somebody that's not, at home, that's empty, they put the "Sorry I missed you" card. When they finally find somebody, they call the candidate over. The candidate comes over and does their 2-minute pitch. The candidate doesn't go into that home, because then that visit becomes a 20-minute visit. Remember, this is about volume, not the quality of voters, but the quantity of voters. So you want to make sure the candidate never goes in there, that they stand out there on the step, give a 2-minute pitch as to why they're the best person. While that candidate's giving the 2-minute pitch, the other volunteers is hitting homes as well and trying to find somebody at home. Obviously, if somebody's not at home, they leave a "Sorry I missed you" card. When they do find somebody at home, they then call the candidate over. "Come on over. Come on down to the next house." That requires the candidate to only give a 2-minute pitch and move on to the next house. However, I leave my other volunteer behind for a couple reasons. One, to ask that voter, would they like a lawn sign? Because these days you can put a lawn sign right out, and if that voter says, yeah, they'd like a lawn sign. I also have that volunteer record data. Did they have a nice dog? Did they say they were a yes with the candidate? Or did they say they were maybe? Or was education or some other issue very important to them? So we get this info and we put it down there. Now you're wondering, how do we sync that up with our database? For the most part, hopefully you have a database that's electronic that you can just record this in on your iPhone. But I always have a hard copy of my voter list, because I don't want to be out there door knocking, get into the sticks, and find out my cell phone's not working and I can't upload my database, and we got to go back all the way to the headquarters to get the database. So I always have a hard copy, so that it's no big deal to then just transfer it back at the headquarters. You always want to make sure that you're using your time to the maximum. So the candidate is then pulled over to the other door. And as that candidate's doing the 2-minute pitch, the other volunteer's finishing up, putting that yard sign, making the notes, and then running down the street to the next persuadable home and trying to get another voter out. This is the push-pull system. It can increase the number of doors your candidate can hit anywhere from 20 to 30% in 1 hour. It's very important that you do this system. It is worth recruiting volunteers to go out with your candidate and to do this. So many times people just send their candidate out there door knocking by themselves, and it's a slow process. And a lot of the times the candidates can get sucked into a conversation that can eat up a whole hour. And so instead of hitting 30 homes, they're hitting one. You're not going to win if you're hitting one home per hour. When you go back to the headquarters after door knocking, you're not done. Like I said, I like to put my door knocking on Red Bull. So there's a couple of extra things we do to make sure that your door knocking effort is worth all of the hard work. One of the things we do is for the people that were home, we sent a card that says, hey, it was nice to meet you, and we have the candidate sign it. I usually require those to go out within 24 hours after the candidate has visited that door. For the people that weren't home, they got a sorry I missed you card, and the candidate also signs that. We do a third card, yes, another card. And this one we use the notes that the volunteers, the push-pull system was using. So if they wrote down that somebody had a nice dog, what we do is write out a personal card, another postcard that says, hey, it was great to meet you back in August, really liked your dog, hope I can count on your vote on Tuesday. And we save these postcards to mail at the last week of the campaign. So there's a lot of effort that goes into this door knocking. But remember, our overall goal for door knocking was voter identification. And so for every home you visited, you're now starting to map out who's with you, who's undecided, and who's against you. For the people that are not with you, the fives, well, as a Republican, the fives are usually not with me. I don't mail them. I don't talk to them. If they're saying when I'm out there door knocking, and remember, we're talking to persuadable, the twos and threes, but if somebody is a 3 and tells me they're not with me, they go to my category. I rank them as a 5. They're not with me. If somebody, while I'm out there door knocking, says that, yes, they're with me, they become a 1. So we're adding to our list, and I know who I need to turn out. We're identifying those votes. Remember, the whole purpose of this is to identify the people so that we can turn them out on election day. So you're getting a ton of data. A lot of times in a campaign, your volunteers can't keep up with getting that data into your database. That's why if we can do it electronically so that it's happening in real time, that's great. If not, you've got to make sure that your manager is staying on top of all that data to get it into your database so that you know on election day or for early voting who to turn out. Now, like we said, you can't possibly hit every single door. So there are other ways that you can identify votes. How? Well, I like phone surveys. And you probably dread the phones, but I like phone surveys. There's a couple ways to do the phone surveys. I do what first is a positive push poll, and it is a live call. It's usually worth the money. I don't have volunteers doing it because volunteers all too often in these calls will try to change up the questions to get the response that they want. I don't want to get positive responses that should be negative responses. So I usually pay a vendor to do these calls. And what is a positive push poll? Well, the first question we ask is, what is the most important issue facing your district? Is it education? Is it healthcare? Is it taxes? What is the most important issue? If you're running for mayor, sometimes those questions can be, is it library funding? Is it trash? What's happening with trash? Is it trash fees? Is it property taxes? So try to figure out first, what is the most important 5 issues going on in your district? So you ask the voters, and remember, we're calling the persuadable voters, just like your door knocking list, we're calling the persuadable voters. We want to talk to those people, not the 1s and 5s. So it's basically the same list as your door knocking list. So we're calling those people when we're asking them, the first question is, what's the most important question? What's the most important issue? The second question is a head-to-head. Are you with your candidate, or with the opponent? If at that time they say that they're with the opponent, we politely end the call. Thank you for taking this call. It's over. But with that, you've gotten some important information. Once again, you've identified somebody for your opponent, and so you list them down. I would list them as a 5, and now they're recorded as a 5. What do you do with that data? Well, you certainly don't remind them to vote on election day. You basically wipe them off. You don't want to send them a piece of mail. You don't want to try to persuade them. You want to move on. You want to buzz the beehive. Okay, so now you call another voter, and this one says that they are with you. Okay, so you find out what issue matters to them, and then they say they're with you. At that point, I say, well, I'm calling for my candidate, and we were wondering, seeing as you're with our candidate, would you like a yard sign? If they say they want a yard sign, that gets marked down, and we put all of this information onto the database, and of course we get a yard sign right out to them. But we mark them as a 1. Now, what do we do with that voter now that they're marked as a 1? Well, we don't have to mail them persuasion postcards. We don't have to do anything other than get them out to vote. So they just go into our database for GeoTV efforts. We don't have to persuade them. What do you do with the people that answer, I don't know? And that happens all too often. So the voter says, okay, I care about, remember we gave them 5 issues in the beginning. Let's say that they cared about taxes. And then they say that they don't know which candidate they're supporting. We say, well, at this point, we identify and say, well, we're taking this phone survey for our candidate. And would you like to know a little bit more information about that candidate? And they'd say, sure. So at that point, we then tell them some important information about that candidate. The only information that we give them is that information is dependent on what they said in the first question. So if they said that taxes was the most important issue to them, then we give them information on taxes and say, well, our candidate is the only one that signed the No New Taxes pledge. And we give them that positive push, not a negative push, positive push for that candidate. Then we ask a follow-up question. Say, now that knowing that our candidate is the only one that signed the No New Taxes pledge, are you more likely or less likely to support that candidate? If at that point they say they're still undecided, well, then we mark them down as a 3 and we still got to work on them. But what we do know about that person is every time we contact them, we're going to talk to them about taxes. If they say now, if the voter says, oh, well, I'm with that candidate, I don't really trust them all that much, so I'll probably still list them off as a 2, but they're leaning our way, and I want to continue to push them over to our effort. And I will continue to talk to them about taxes and work them over. Now, a lot of times I will do the phone surveys in conjunction while I'm outdoor knocking. So there will be times when we're outdoor knocking that my candidate will actually know what issue the voter cares about. So we're doing the phone surveys and we've identified people that are in the middle and what issue they care about. So when the candidate shows up to that door, if they've told us taxes is their issue, then my candidate should be talking to them about taxes. When you're talking to that person on their issue that they care about, they're more likely at that point to say, hey, I'm going to be with you. What do they call this? This is what they call micro-targeting. So you're identifying the votes. You're identifying voters on the issues that they care about. This is what they call micro-targeting. It's not that difficult, but that's what it is. So you're using all this data in conjunction, remember, for your GeoTV plan, and you're whittling down that list of undecided people in the middle, so that you know who to turn out on election day. You're not going to reach 100% of voters through door knocking or phone surveys. It's hard to get people to answer their phones these days. Well, there's a new technology out there that is helping a lot of campaigns. It's called peer-to-peer texting. Why would you want to text people? 92% of people read their text messages. You can't get 92% of people to read their emails, answer their phones, or answer their doors. So this is a good way to cut through the clutter. For the most part, well, you have to hire a vendor to do this. It's not something that you can do internally on a campaign. You have to hire a vendor. What do? Well, you send the vendor your persuadable voters, the people in the middle, and they match it to a cell phone list. Then you work with that vendor on a message that you want to send out. And, sometimes it can be just a word message. Other times you want to put a word message and links into it and video. But overall, you work with the vendor on the message that they feel that will help you persuade those voters. Once you send out the message, sure, you're going to get some pushback from people that don't like being contacted on their cell phones. That happens. But you're also going to get a lot of messages from people responding positively, asking for lawn signs, saying that they're with your candidate. There can be other people saying they're not with your candidate. You're whittling down that list of people that are in the middle. You take this data from the text messaging and you put it onto that database. Once again, all that information has to go onto your database. So you're working every single day on identifying more and more voters. These are some of the methods. Today we've discussed some of the methods on voter identification, which is crucial for your GOTV plan. You have to be doing this from day one on your campaign to get your GOTV to work. You can't say 10 days out from the election, oh, I want to do GOTV, and yet you haven't identified any voters. So these are some of the crucial ways to do it. I'm Holly Robichaud, and if you ever have any questions about GOTV or voter identification, you can email me at hollyrobichaud@msn.com.